Thanks everyone for being here. For those just joining, we'll get started in about a minute. And actually, I see that it just turned 9 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, so I'll go ahead and get started. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all to day 2 of the 2021 Yampa Basin Rendezvous, a dialogue on drought, water availability, and conservation. As you are settling in, we did this yesterday and it worked really nicely. Please comment in the chat with your name, affiliation, and the sector that you work in so that we can get a sense of who we have joining us today. I'll encourage you throughout to use the chat liberally. We have several folks monitoring chat to pull out questions and things like that. So please don't hesitate to comment, have conversations in the chat around the presentations, things like that. I also want to give a quick thank you to Hugh Carey for this gorgeous photograph of the Yampa River near Maybell. I'm going to go over quickly today's Zoom meeting format. We did this yesterday, so I'll do this pretty quickly just for anyone new who's joining us today. This meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council website, as well as Friends of the Yampa and CW3E's website. Last year's conference will be available there, as well as day 1, which was yesterday, and today's sessions of this year's conference. You have been muted upon your entry into the meeting. Please remain muted unless you'd like to speak a question. You also have control over whether you'd like to share your video or not. You may, again, please use chat liberally to ask questions or to have discussions with other attendees. Chat monitors, again, will be able to pull out questions for the speakers to make sure that those don't get lost in the shuffle. If we don't have time to get to all of people's questions, we will be providing those to the speakers after the fact in order to be able to provide them along with the video and a document for anyone in the audience who might be interested. If you would like to speak your question, please use the reactions button to choose raise hand, and we'll call on you during the discussion to ask your question. If you're on the phone, you can press *9 to engage in Q&A. We'd also like to point out that you can change whose video appears on your screen and how you're looking at things by going into the upper right-hand corner, clicking View to adjust as you'd like. I'll take a quick moment and won't read out everyone's name, but just to once again thank our steering committee, which really brings the mission of Yampa Basin Rendezvous to life and has worked really hard to transition to virtual this year and last, and we really hope to be back in person again by our next event. Also, we'd like to thank and recognize our partners. The collaboration that comes about with this event is really something we truly value, and it's made possible by all of these partners. So we really, really thank you. We'd also like to give a special welcome and shout out to all the students in attendance at today's conference, including those enrolled in Colorado Mountain College's Soil Moisture, Precipitation, and Streamflow class. So thanks all for being here. If you live in the Yampa Valley, we'd encourage you to go check out the Pine Moon Art Gallery during the month of September. One of our steering committee members, Jill Bergman, has organized this exhibit focused on sandhill cranes and the Yampa River. So we highly recommend you checking it out. It's really wonderful. We've also, Jill Bergman has led the creation of a community art activities session or program, excuse me. For more information, you can look at Friends of the Yampa's website, and we'll also be highlighting some of these in the intermission. I just want to give some quick highlights from day 1, where we had Colorado Mountain College leadership give us a very wonderful welcome, and then an introductory panel and a panel covering the latest drought science. Once again, these panels have been recorded and will be available on the website for those of you who'd like to check that out. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our first panel of day 2, Nicole Seltzer. Nicole Seltzer has had a 20+ year career in Colorado water and has lived in Oak Creek since 2016. She specializes in designing processes that convene diverse stakeholders to plan technical water resources projects. During her career, she's managed public input for federal and state reservoir and pipeline permitting processes, facilitated communities of practice for water education, watershed planning, and environmental water transactions, and produced written, audio, and video content to simply explain complex water topics to diverse audiences. She's currently the Colorado River Program Director for River Network. River Network is a national nonprofit river conservation organization, and she was previously the Executive Director of Water Education Colorado and worked for the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. Nicole, we're so excited to have you here with us today. Welcome. I'll now turn it over to you for panel 3, Current Water Management Strategies.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning. I hope that you will get as much as I have already out of the next the next panel. We have 3 folks who are going to talk a little bit about current water management strategies in the Yampa River Basin. And specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about how scientists and the community can work together to manage the impacts of drought, and what our trends are looking like in the basin in terms of water management and supply, and what the role that we can play as community members and scientists to really start to influence conservation planning a little bit more. So we have a wonderful panel for you this morning with Mike Camblin, Allison Gould, and Kevin Ryan. And I'll go a little bit into each of their bios before they speak. The way that we're going to structure this morning is each panelist will have about 20 minutes to do a presentation, and then we're going to have about a 40-minute discussion at the end, and we'll take your questions. So as Anna said, I hope that you can, as you start thinking of them, just put them in the chat, and we'll sort of corral them later in the panel. So I am going to kick us off with Mike. Mike Camblin ranches in Maybell, Colorado with his wife, Donna, and their 3 children. They sell purebred Angus cattle on a 4th generation ranch. Maybell is down in the far lower end of the basin. Mike is highly involved in the Yampa Basin community. In addition to being on the Basin Roundtable, he's also on the Colorado Cattlemen's Association board, the Land Use Board, the 4-H Foundation, and many other things. He's a wonderful asset to the water management community in the Yampa Basin. So Mike, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. Hope things are going good. You'll have to bear with me a little bit on my computer technology. I get a little behind on some of this stuff. I'm old. So as Nicole stated, you know, I I do a lot within the Yampa Basin. I sit on the round table, but I've been on the Maybell Irrigation District for about 20 years, and we've done a lot of changes there, a lot of management changes there, and that's what my presentation is about today. So let me share my screen here real quick, and we'll get started on our PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and of course I've already messed it up. I'm let me see. Starting further. Okay, I'm assuming everybody can see that, and you can hear me okay. So the Maybell Irrigation District consists of about 18 miles of ditch. We have several hundred head gates. It was hand built in the late 1800s, approximately 3/4 of a mile of hand laid wall. I mean, them guys were up there with horses and shovels and picks. We have 24 shareholders. We pull approximately 129, or have the ability to pull 129 CFS from the Yampa River, and we are the largest ag right in the Yampa River. An interesting fact was when they first built it, we did not have a head gate. They built the ditch and it flowed year round. There's been a lot of changes in this ditch in the last 100 years. It starts in the Little Juniper Canyon. If you see my cursor right here, the head gate is right here, and the ditch actually runs down along the bank there. And this is where all that hand laid rock I was talking about is. They went up there, they camped, they strung cables from this side to that side, and brought juniper trees over for the diversion structure. They worked awful hard to get water into the Maybell Flat. And so it was very important to them at that time. And it continues to be that for us. It's the economic backbone of Maybell. Not only does it supply our agriculture with water for not only our crops, but our livestock. In the fall, we figured up here a couple of years ago or whatever, we've got somewhere around 3,000 head of livestock that drink out of the Maybell ditch in the fall. So it's very important to agriculture. The Maybell Park relies a lot on the Maybell ditch. It actually fills the wells that they water the park with, just through sub irrigation, and several wells in town for that matter too. You know, if the ditch shut off for summer or whatever, I think we'd have some wells dry up. The horse drive, the famous horse drive with Sombrero Ranches, they come through in the spring and water the horses through there. Firefighters, we let firefighters pull water out of it when they need to fight fires. Of course, I've mentioned the town wells, and it's also very important to the late season river flow. As I mentioned before, you know, we get a lot of sub irrigation from that, and that water travels into the river in the late season. So that's another important piece. When I got on this board, we basically turned our head gates open in the spring and let it run. And the more we got into it, and we started seeing some fish recovery coming in, and we realized, you know what, we're going to have to start managing this. We just can't let it run. Not only for the benefit of the fish and downstream holders, but for ourselves also. We had to run at full blast, but otherwise we couldn't supply water to everybody. So we sat down and tried to figure out what would be the best way to do that. And money was an object. It really was. I mean, to do these management changes, it was really expensive. And so when we got started on this, I did the grants for the ditch, not knowing how entailed a grant was. It was brutal for me. There's just so much paperwork involved and everything else. And I volunteer for my position, so you know, it was non-compensated, and I spent a ton of time going after grants and working on grants and getting construction lined up and so forth. And so when we originally got started, some of the first things we did was the check structures. And our thought process behind this check structure was, being an open ditch, it was really hard to, like I said, we had to keep the ditch full so that the irrigators could actually get the water out of their head gates. And so to manage it, we decided to build these check structures. And basically this is just anywhere from 12 to 18 inches of boards in our check structures. And the idea of that was to slow the water down and actually raise the water. As you can see here, how much that slowed it down and raised it, so that this is actually on the Chew property, so that they could pull the water out of the ditch and be more efficient with their water. And what that does for the rancher is it allows him to go across that field a lot faster. On some of my fields that I irrigate, if I don't have the water I need, it'll take me 5 or 6 days to get across some acreage. And once we started implementing these projects or whatever, I could get across the same acreage in 3 days. So it makes a huge difference. And we're actually using less water. So it was kind of a no-brainer, but we could only afford 3. The ditch did the first couple out of our own pocket. We had a couple shareholders help us with that, you know, if it was on their property or whatever. But we soon realized that we couldn't do that on our own. And so that's when I started with the grants. The fish recovery program gave us the money for an automated gate. This is a waste gate that we put in, basically because we knew to replace the head gates and so forth, we were looking at over $1 million at that time. And we knew that wasn't going to be feasible. So this actually sits a mile from the head gate. And it's automated. If we want 85 CFS running through the ditch, when it gets to this point, if it's above 85 CFS, it opens the gates. And if it's below 85 CFS, it closes them a little bit, and it helps us maintain an even flow. What we realized when we put this in was the river was actually influencing the ditch approximately 18 times a day. That gate was open and closing. And so we didn't have any idea that it was doing that until we put these gates in. And they're set on a 5 CFS perimeter. So the river was rising and lowering 5 CFS in the ditch 18 times during the day. So to keep our tailwater and so forth down, I mean, 5 CFS is quite a bit, and it's really hard to maintain that tailwater when you got, you know, several hundred head gates, people opening and closing, and it was a challenge, and it still to this day is a challenge. We did a little bit of liner. The problem here was we just couldn't afford to do a lot of it. You know, we were doing 400 to 500 stretches at a time, and we were having to borrow money and go after grants, and it was a lot of work. So from that, bear with me here for a minute while I get this started. And I'll talk through this here a little bit. We got TNC involved in this project. This actually started out with a beer. Hopefully that music's not too loud. We started out with a beer. And Jeff Blakesley with TNC, Nancy Smith with TNC, and Kent Ventures with the Friends of the Yampa sat down and tried to figure out how we can solve some of these problems. And so we continued to kind of battle it out. And I told him at that time, I said, I just don't have the time and wherewithal to do all this grant work and so forth. And TNC stepped up. And so through that process, we were able to do projects like the one that you're seeing on the screen right now. TNC went after the grants. They helped us do all the paperwork. Jennifer Wellman is the lead on that now, and she does an awesome job for us. She spends a lot of time doing this because it wouldn't happen without it. We started with TNC and we started working with more head gates. So we got these head gates, or I mean, I'm sorry, these check structures going. Where's the next slide here? I'm going to wait on that a little bit. So we got these next check structures going. They helped us install, we did a total of 9 check structures. They helped us install more liner. And one of the things that really helped us with them was I was at a round table, and one of the grants that I had done, we'd actually exceeded the grant money. We were short about $3,000, and I was in a conundrum trying to figure out how do we do this. And Jeff Blakesley stepped up and he said, you know what, we'll help. And they did. They wrote us a $3,000 check and said, you know, let's get this finished. And so TNC has been really, really good for us. We're very happy with it. So the project that we're working on really, really hard now and have for several years now is this. This is our new headgate infrastructure. And this is actually just a 30% design. We have 2 different designs. I just put this one in just to kind of show kind of what we're thinking. So this is the diversion structure that you see here. These are our head gates, and then it goes into the Maple ditch. This is our measuring flume that we installed several years ago. And then we have a series of, I don't know what you call them. I guess you'd call them kind of a fish ladder to a certain extent. to where the fish can move through there a lot easier. Boaters can move through there a lot easier, and we can utilize the water into the ditch when we need it. So it's a practice that's been needed for a long time. To adjust this head gate at this time right now, our dead shredder has to walk almost a mile up to these head gates, and it takes 2 people to adjust those gates. So 2 people have to go up there and adjust those, and you just can't do that, you know, several times a day. It just doesn't work. And so this will be automated. We should be able to get on a phone or a computer or whatever and look and see where we're at and make the adjustments. And we should be able to do several adjustments a day if we need to, and it should be quick and easy. We wanted to keep this as natural looking as we could. We didn't want, you know, a lot of concrete in there, and we wanted it to look natural. And so we're really excited with this design that JUB has come up with. They've done a really good job with that, and they've worked well with us and TNC. And so this is our newest project right here. So this project actually benefits everybody. Not only does it benefit the agriculture committee or community, but it benefits the recreational community, the fish community, and the environment community. And so we hit on every one of those targets. And so this project has brought a lot of interest to the basin, and there's been a lot of people watching what we've got going on. And so we're trying really hard to do a really good job. So this picture is a flume that they built. They actually designed this flume on a napkin in the Maybell restaurant. And the original flume had broke, and they did that in like less than 2 weeks. They designed it, built this flume, drug it down off the top of the hill, and pulled it across with dozers. And so they didn't have at that time, they didn't have all the stuff that we've got to go through nowadays to get stuff done. So they did it very quick. So pretty incredible what they did, even, you know, not too long ago. So as I said, since this project is helping so many people, we've got so many project partners, and so many people have helped us donated money to us and helped us with grants. You know, we got the Nature Conservancy, we got the Friends of the Yampa, Moffat County's behind us, American Water, CWC board, the Yampa Green White Table. There's been several donors that wanted to remain anonymous. So this project's brought a lot of attention, and we're hoping that it works really well for everybody. So the project timeline on this, you know, we're hoping that the final design will be done somewhere between December and February 2022. Like I said, we're at 30% now. We just got to 30% design this week. So we've got a long ways to go on that, but JUB is doing a really good job on that. We've had the community engagement the whole time. You know, we've talked to not only the ag shareholders, but, you know, the fish people, the boat people, and BLM and everything else. We'll get started on the permitting and the NEPA stuff now. We're hoping to get started for bids for construction in January and April, between January and April of 2022, and actually get started on this. We're hoping to actually get started and have dirt moving sometime around June, August, and try to keep the disruption down for the irrigators, and then hopefully get completed in December of 2022. So like I said, we've been working on this project for several years now, and the manpower that TNC's put forward for us has just been awesome. So with that, I'm going to move on to Nicole and let her go from there.
Thanks, Mike. That is such a great example of agricultural producers partnering with conservation NGOs to try to accomplish multiple sets of goals. And I know everybody's really excited to see the Maybell project move forward. So thanks for that. We are going to move on to Allison Gould with the Colorado Water Trust. Allison was born and raised in Colorado. She lives on the Front Range, though we do like to claim her as a very important partner in the Yampa Basin. She got her JD from the University of Denver Stern College of Law, and she was in private practice before she became counsel for the Colorado Water Trust. And she's going to tell us a little bit about how we manage and plan for environmental flows in the Yampa River. Allison, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Nicole, and I'm glad to be claimed by the West Slope. All right, I'm gonna move into screen sharing if I can make that happen. All right. Okay, I think it's working. All right, so as Nicole mentioned, my name is Allison Meyer Gould, and I am a staff attorney with the Colorado Water Trust. I will be presenting upon the current water management strategies used by the Water Trust and its partners in the Yampa River Basin. Before I get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Water Trust. We're a Denver-based nonprofit. We work statewide to restore flows to Colorado's rivers in need. We were formed in 2001 to partner with Colorado's in-stream flow program and amplify its work. We work with water users to put together voluntary transactions to benefit the environment. And we work within the prior appropriation system and compensate water users at a fair market value. This year is the Water Trust's 20th anniversary, and over the past 20 years, we've helped to restore about 13.5 billion gallons of water to about 589 miles of natural stream. All right. Moving into the presentation, I've broken it down into 3 parts. In the first part, I'm going to look at water management through the prism of the economic concepts of supply and demand. Then in part 2, I'll introduce the strategic reservoir releases, which is the mechanism that can be used to supplement water supply and thereby boost flows in the natural stream. And in part 3, I'll give an overview of the Water Trust's work in the Yampa Basin in the past, now, and looking towards the future. So supply and demand are concepts that are commonly used to explain the balance and often tension between what's available and what's needed. In the context of water, the vast majority of water supply comes from the sky in the form of snow and rain. And I'm sure we have a number of hydrometeorologists who know a lot more about this than I do. But in Colorado, about 80% of our stream flow comes in the form of snow and is stored over winter in our snowpack. The other 20% comes from rain and groundwater infiltration. As far as demand statewide, about 89% of water is estimated to be consumed in agriculture, and around 11% is estimated to be consumed by municipal and industrial purposes. However, not all uses are consumptive, and about 5.5% of the state's water is used non-consumptively for recreational and environmental purposes. In general, the trend on supply is decreasing, and I'm again sure that a lot of you folks know a lot more about that than I do. And on the other hand, demand is increasing. In the Yampa Basin specifically, one recent analysis anticipates that there may be an annual supply-demand gap by 2050 of about 4% or up to 4% for municipal and industrial use, and between 3 and 11% for agriculture, depending upon how things shake out as far as temperature and growth. Now let's take a closer look at supply. Supply in the water world is anything but constant, as you all know, and this is a simplified hydrograph that illustrates how stream flow could change over the course of a year. It starts out low when the stream flow is building up, can get high when it starts to run off and melt, and then again kind of balances out here with a couple of little bumps when there are precipitation events. So basically, at this point, we're back to this beginning. So let's compare this to a topic that I'm sure you all discussed in great detail yesterday, which is an example of where supply is limited by drought conditions. First, there's less snow, so there's less snowpack, so less runoff. What runoff there is then absorbed by parched soils before it reaches the stream. Rain events are smaller and less frequent, giving less relief in the hottest summer months. And overall, there's just less water in the stream. And while the stream may not totally dry out, it does get a lot closer than it would otherwise. All right, shifting gears, let's turn to demand. Here we have the original simplified hydrograph, but again, you'll note in a couple of places it dips down because of diversions of water out of the stream. For example, industrial in the winter for snowmaking, and in July and August, diversions for agriculture and municipal use. Like with the drought scenario, although the stream may not go completely dry at certain times of the year, it does dip pretty low. The other aspect of demand that's important to consider is location. Just because the flow drops low at one point in the stream doesn't necessarily mean it dips low everywhere. So here's an example of how this could happen. Take a flow of 100 CFS. First, there's diversion of 60 CFS for municipal, leaving 40 in the stream. Next, there's a diversion of 20 for irrigation, and this leaves 20 in the stream. Below this location, return flow from the irrigation accrues to the stream, and treated water is discharged back to the stream. But above the return flows and below the diversions, the water can actually get pretty low and creates a low flow pinch point here. So consider for a minute what this location would look like in a drought scenario. Instead of 20 CFS in the river, it might dry up altogether. So with that table setting, as in economics, finding that balance between supply and demand can be tricky and sometimes involves a little intervention to get things back into balance. The same can be the case in water management, and sometimes active management can help mitigate circumstances that would otherwise be pretty dire. So the mechanism used by the Colorado Water Trust and its partners on the Yampa River is strategic reservoir releases, which serves to supplement the existing supply when and where it's needed. It's pretty simple and involves three basic steps. First, water is stored in an upstream reservoir, and when it's available, usually during runoff in early spring. Second, stream conditions are monitored as the season progresses. And finally, when flow gets dangerously low or river water temperatures get dangerously high, or both, which is often the case, water is released as needed from storage to boost the flows in the stream. Plugging this into the supply and the demand examples we just went through, the reservoir releases would be timed when the flow drops particularly low. And as far as location, the water is released upstream of the low flow pinch point so that the flow never drops as low within this reach as it would without the boost. In this example, we have an additional 20 CFS that is added to the stream, so the stream never drops below 40 CFS, transit losses aside. In a drought, such release might help avoid a dry up, or if supply allows, perhaps even more water could be released to the stream to boost flows even more. So now that we've discussed the concept of supplementing supply by strategic reservoir releases, I'd like to turn to how the Colorado Water Trust and its many partners have implemented this mechanism in the Yampa River. The Water Trust work in the Yampa began in 2012, and to date, most of our work has been focused on the upper Yampa River between Stagecoach Reservoir and the city of Steamboat. The figures in this slide focus on this location, specifically this area with the little blue star, which is the Yampa below the Stagecoach Reservoir, which is also pictured here. In collaboration with a number of partners, including the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, the City of Steamboat, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board, the Water Trust has supplemented supply in the Upper Yampa in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2018, and 2020 for a grand total of just over 12,100 acre feet. Figure 1 shows the timing of these releases. As you can see, the amount, which is in red, is relatively small when compared to the overall hydrograph in blue. However, you will note that they are very strategically timed to try and keep the river from really bottoming out. Figure 2 illustrates just how critical these releases actually were. This green line here is 50% of the river, and these are the releases made from Stagecoach Reservoir. At a number of times, the amount of water that was released from the reservoir actually got up to almost half of the flow in the river. Turning to today, the Water Trust has carried on making reservoir releases this year and is actually making releases as we speak. The figures in this slide show some recent measurement that go into the Water Trust thinking when determining timing and rate of release from the reservoir. Figure 1 right here starts right below Stagecoach Reservoir, and this is pretty recent. As of yesterday, in combination with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, there is being released about 50 CFS from the reservoir. Figure 2, this one shows the water temperature in the river at Steamboat. And when the water temperature hangs out in the yellow and the red sections, the fish can get pretty uncomfortable because they are cold water species. When water is released from the reservoir, it can help to mitigate some of those temperatures, and also boosting the stream depth can help mitigate some of the detrimental effects to the fish. Figure 3 shows the flow rate of the river in Steamboat. For this figure, I find it helpful to recall the slide with the diagram with boosted flows, where the flow rate never got so low because of the boosted flows. So here you can kind of imagine that floating down here, and it's boosted up here, and it's currently between about 70 and about 50 CFS. Also notable in this diagram 3 is we have the medium flow rate in Steamboat over the past 111 years. As you will note, it is considerably less, about 30 CFS less than the median flow rate is what we're looking at now, even with the boosted flows. So instead of looking at the past, let's actually look to the future and how the Water Trust envisions its work in the Yampa Basin going forward. The Water Trust has 4 overarching goals. First, we want to our work to try and adapt to changing conditions and new information. For example, figures 1 and 2 show illustrations from a new draft report that our moderator, Nicole Seltzer, will know more about. These figures show the Yampa River in the blue dots, and the colorful dots, pinks and oranges, show the places that the flow may be lower than the in-channel environmental targets for some portion of the year. The Water Trust would like to learn from this and other new information that is coming out and try to adapt our work in the Yampa Basin to meet some of these new, to address some of these new information. Second, the Water Trust would like to be really more holistic in its approach to the Yampa. To this point, most of our work has been focused on the Upper Yampa, but a river is a system, and as such, looking at it as a whole is one of our goals, and how we can try to boost flows in the lower part of the river is one thing that we're really trying to strive for. Third, boosting stream flow obviously benefits the organisms that live in the stream, but boosted stream flow also can have a wider benefit, and the Water Trust would really like to maximize the benefits to as many sectors in the basin as possible. Finally, we want to continue to work and innovate alongside our partners in the Yampa Basin. The Yampa Basin is a recognized leader across the state as far as community involvement and water management collaboration, as you just heard from the last presentation. It's also embraced and been on the cutting edge of putting into practice new legal mechanisms. We, along with a number of our partners, including the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, the Yampa River Fund, Tri-State Generation and Transmission, and the Colorado River District, and many others, are continuing this transition and actively finding new ways to work together to push into new territories of collaborative water management. And so with that, I would like to thank you and turn it back over to Nicole.
Thanks, Allison. That was a really great walkthrough of how the Water Trust can partner with the water management entities in the Yampa Basin in order to produce some environmental flow support, which is so important for our recreational economy. And it does provide other benefits as well. Having more water in the stream obviously is beneficial for everybody in terms of just moving water through the system. And the work with the Water Trust is so important. So thanks. Okay, we are going to turn our attention to our final panelist. Kevin Ryan is the state engineer. He's the director of the Colorado Division of Water Resources, which many of you might also know as the state engineer's office. He has worked there for quite a long time. He's been there for about 23 years. And Kevin lives on the Front Range and is highly involved in a lot of the water rights administration strategies that the state is pursuing statewide, but specifically also in the Yampa Basin. So Kevin's going to tell us a little bit about the state's priorities for water rights administration.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you to the preceding presenters, both Allison and Mike. That was very interesting for me. I'm going to share my screen as I'm talking, but that was interesting for me. And I just want to note that it's interesting, gratifying, helpful when we see that some of these things that the parties like to do, like on the Maybell and the work that Allison is doing, aligns somewhat with our administration goals and our administration approaches, and we can all be on the same page and make those things work. And I'll ask someone to give me the thumbs up that you see my opening slide. Thank you, Maddie.
Yep, we can see it, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. As I look at the topics we have today and some of the things that I've talked about recently in the basin and would like to continue talking about, I saw that we're really looking at what I would call a confluence of issues. And as you see on the left, the three topics I have for today, the Yampa Basin or the Yampa River over appropriation, measurement rules, and compact compliance administration, they all fall into this realm of Colorado River issues. And probably some of you have heard me talk about one or two of these. Some of you have probably heard me talk about all three of these in the past. But it occurred to me today for the first time that we're really talking about things that overlap and interact with each other. And it turns out you really can't talk about one without talking about the other two. And quite honestly, as I look at my figure there, well, we could have many other areas going into the Colorado River issues box. And we just are not having enough time to talk about those today. And I'm not the right person to talk about all of them. But it is something we could look at as just a myriad issues that go on in the Colorado River Basin right now that we could be talking about. But I will focus, first of all, on the Yampa over appropriation. And I'm going to be fairly quick about this because I know some of you have heard me talk about this before, but we're also going to have some question and answer time to talk about it more. But you've heard that Aaron White has put together a good scientific data-driven report about conditions in the Yampa River Basin, particularly above the confluence of the Little Snake River up to areas that haven't been determined to be over-appropriated before. And it's important to recognize the fact that the climate is changing, the demands are changing, and when those two curves intersect, we run into a situation where the basin is, as we say, over-appropriated. What does that mean? That means that there is a call on the river that senior water rights are not satisfied, and therefore, if some diversion is taking place, that needs to be curtailed. And that's just recognition of that situation, that there needs to be a call placed to curtail water rights to satisfy those senior water rights that are not getting enough water. This map just gives you a quick look at the area in yellow that we're talking about, and that is the focus of Aaron White's report. Aaron is on the call today, but it gives you a geographic idea of what we're talking about. And the mystery of this is probably solved for many of you and you understand, but we just really need to be clear. What does this formal determination mean? Because if I, as the state engineer, excuse me, do formally recognize this hydrologic / administrative situation that we need to place a call due to changing conditions, it's just really recognizing what's happening in the real world. So I'm not really doing anything other than acknowledging this situation. It doesn't change the way surface water rights are appropriated. You can still make an appropriation. You're still going to be subject to prior appropriation, risk of curtailment. And it doesn't change the administration. As I just said, you're still in that same situation with a junior water right. If seniors are not satisfied, you're at risk of curtailment. That could all and does happen without a formal determination from me based on Aaron's report. But there is a significant change to well permitting, and we need to just understand why. If we look at new well permit applications in the Yampa River Basin, if the basin is not over appropriated, that is, all water rights are satisfied all the time, then we can issue new well permits. One of the important requirements to issue a new well permit is that there be no injury. It's in the statutes. And so when a well pumps and has a delayed impact on the stream 1 week, 1 month, 1 year later, that's not a problem because all the water rights are satisfied. However, if the basin is over appropriated, we can't make that clear finding of no injury. And we need to just identify the fact, or we need to recognize the fact that that well's pumping and its impact to the stream will likely occur at a time when a senior water right is not satisfied. So after it's over appropriated, there may be limited situations where domestic well permits can be issued under the presumption of no injury. That's a legal presumption, not an engineering finding. But otherwise, most other well permits, residential, commercial, irrigation, industrial, municipal, et cetera, will need to have an augmentation plan to recognize those delayed impacts to the stream and mitigate those impacts so senior water rights are not injured. The process from here, Aaron has submitted a report to me. As I said, it's a scientific data-driven report that happened in March. We sent notice to parties to let them look at that and understand that. We did that through a press release. We allowed a 30-day comment period. We've had some comments, but I've mentioned in the past, and my commitment is that we would like to continue the public outreach. I have found, and Aaron, in our contact with water users, especially on the lower Yampa, that there's still not a clear understanding of the basis for this designation, the impact, and without that, people are not getting a fair opportunity to respond. So during this fall, as Aaron and I are out in the basin more, we will continue that outreach, make sure that there's a clear understanding. Then after that, I can make a decision about the basin's over appropriation. Again, with the impact really being when we look at new well permit applications, we will be able to apply this determination and ensure that they replace their depletions that could otherwise injure senior water right. So we'll, pardon me, we will pursue that further in the next few months as we continue our outreach. The next issue in our confluence of issues, measurement rules. On August 19th, Deputy State Engineer Mike Sullivan and I did a webinar. Some of you may have sat in on that. And we talked, among other things, actually it's the same topics you see here, but we spent a lot of time focusing on measurement rules. And I want to let you understand and give you a little more information what the importance of measurement rules is in the Yampa River Basin and on the West Slope. And just let me clarify and set your expectation now. When I talk about measurement rules, we're talking about the West Slope. We have good measurement on the Front Range and Rio Grande basins, the South Platte, Arkansas, and Rio Grande. but it's in the West Slope basins and to the point in Division 6, the Yampa River Basin, that we don't have as much robust and consistent and reliable measurement on all the divisions. So we're talking about the West Slope divisions and Division 6 in particular. I've got just excerpts from a very long verbose statute, but it really just highlights the fact that under the statute already we do have what I'll call authority, but the responsibility to require head gates and measuring devices in divisions for priority administered water rights. But there is that language in there that I've underlined and put in another bullet that is only applicable where necessary. So part of the reason for rules is to clarify that where necessary component to it. But before we get to that, why measure at all? Why measure divisions? And I break that into two components. One is administration. Interstate administration is important. I know that a couple of years ago when Aaron Light, the division engineer in Yampa, had to place a call when she saw senior water rights that were diverting junior to the call, but fairly senior. She was not able to tell how much water they were taking in some cases due to the lack of a measuring device. And without that understanding of how much water was being taken, she could not allow continued diversion by them. And otherwise, they may have still been able to take water. So she had to curtail them. And that's just one focused example of why it's so important for interstate administration. But also at the other end of the interstate spectrum and chronologic spectrum, if someday we do need to do compact administration, in much the same way, that measuring device, that ability to identify how much water is being diverted will also be important to know whether we can allow the division to continue under compact administration or whether it needs to be curtailed. Now, somewhere in between, there's an important data consideration. And when we talk about a compact obligation, I just want to be clear about the data piece of this, because obviously a measuring device is nice, it looks nice, and we feel good that it's there, but it's really about getting the data from that measuring device. And the data is helpful to the water user to protect against abandonment, to assist them if they ever want to change the water right, but maybe more to the point, what's important about the data is if we do have a compact obligation, it will be critical for Colorado to have good, reliable data of how we used water. Even more specifically, if the Upper Colorado River Commission sees us going into a compact administration situation, and as you'll see in a few minutes, I think that's years out yet. But if we get into that situation, one of the things the commission is going to be looking at is how the individual states have used water in the preceding years. And we, in Colorado, to protect our interests, would like for the commission to have the best, most accurate data they possibly can, so that the commission is not guessing, is not doing inferential analyses to determine how Colorado has used its water. That's very important, and that would be the third reason out of those why measurement at all. But then why measurement rules? Why have rules? Because I just showed you a statute that gives Aaron Light the authority that she's exercised to require measuring devices. But it's really about managing the need ahead of time and just contemplating it as a group of water users. And it's consistency, it's transparency for all of the water users. It allows us to recognize different scenarios because not every diversion is the same, not every beneficial use is the same. And we can plan for alternatives and have stakeholder involvement and efficient implementation as a result. So, that's a list of why I, in my regulatory capacity, in so many instances around the state, it works so much better if we get together ahead of time before the need has really hit us hard and the urgency in front of us. instead, if we can spend our time in a more contemplative way and in a way that we get involved in, consider all scenarios and all perspectives, and get a set of rules that people believe in. Then when the urgency is there, or then when we impose that need on people, we all know what we're looking at. We're looking at a set of rules that went through a good, formal, inclusive process. That's what I like about rules. The components of it could be just stating statutory authority, as I said, the applicabilities and definitions, but importantly, the methods and the functional standards that would be used, and also importantly, how reporting would be done. And then, of course, the necessary piece of enforcement and how enforcement of the rules would take place. We're beginning with Division 6, as I said. You're already in the middle of it. Aaron has issued some orders. Water users are aware of what's going on. We can bring success from Division 6 to other West Slope divisions and continue to work with them after we're done. We've identified some local partners. We're already planning meetings. We have at least one scheduled, and we'll make sure people know about those so that we can have good stakeholder input as we move ahead very soon here. I'm looking at my time, and I just want to move ahead with compact compliance administration, and I will move quickly through this and rely on our time together as we go through questions. I really want us to understand again what the Upper Colorado River Compact says, and I talked about this just a minute ago. But in a compact administration situation, it says curtailment may be necessary if the flow at Leaf area is not met. And the commission sets the quantity and time of curtailment for each state. But the state, and meaning Colorado, determines how to meet compact compliance obligations. When we look at compact compliance strategy for Colorado, and maybe particularly for my agency, the State Engineer's Office, the strategy addresses those three pieces, A, B, and C. So it's a multifaceted, it's a holistic approach that addresses those. And I just want to make the point that it's part of a compact compliance strategy, not compact curtailment. Look at the Colorado River Compact. And let's just get to the point on the urgency of this compact compliance strategy, or where there's maybe not as much urgency as we might think. Under the compact, the upper division states need to not deplete the flow at Leaf Ferry below 75 million acre feet for any running 10-year period. And that's the upper basin standard for us to meet. But what is compliance and how do we maintain it? And this is where I think a lot about rulemaking. For compact administration, we're not talking about measurement rules. Now we're talking about compact administration and the potential for rulemaking. Should the state engineer be doing that tomorrow? Is there urgency for me to do it starting tomorrow? And I'm going to give you one perspective on that, and I bet there's conversation that has other perspectives. But let's just look at the data. This is pretty small. You may not be able to read it, but it's in the middle column, it's the annual flow at Leaf Ferry. And in the third column, the 10-year total, that number that we're comparing to the 75 million acre feet of the compact. And as you look, just without identifying specific numbers, but visually you can see we were in great shape in 01. And that has gone down over time. We had a couple good years, but right now in 2020, we sit at 92 million acre feet of delivery, which is, of course, well above the 75 million. And let's just take a closer look at the last 6 years. Again, in the 90 to 92 million acre foot range for any preceding 10 years for those years. Pardon me. What does that look like? Just to make the point visually, that 75 million is the number we're concerned about, and you can see from the blue line, that's where we are right now in 2020. So that gives me no urgency to to reckon with today, that in 2021, we're going to have a need. And so I'm going to be bold and forecast a little bit what we might look at. And there's an important disclaimer for me here. I am not that climate forecast person. I am not the Upper Colorado River Commission or the Bureau of Reclamation. And, you know, I hear people speak from the Water Center that know this so well. I am just poorly equipped to be a climate forecasting person. But I am very focused on doing my job well and addressing this concern. And so I wanted to take a look out 5 or 6 years and consider what is going to happen. So if you look at my chart here through 2020, this is the data I just showed you. This is real data. This is what we compare to the 75 million. If we look at 2021 and 2022, what we anticipate based on the 24-month study from the Bureau of Reclamation is these releases. And by the way, when I show 8.38 and 7.16 million acre feet for 21 and 22, I took their number and added 150,000 acre foot, which is a gain of the river from Powell to Lee Ferry. And then for 2023 through 2025, this is a conservative number for planning purposes only. I think it's a good number. It should be met. Even with that, in 2025, we're at 84 million acre feet. Now, there is a Mexico obligation. I'm not going to go into that, but we need to consider that. I could put us at 82.5 million acre feet, potentially, as far as I mean. But I think the short answer is that I don't see the urgency in the next few years to be doing compact administration or to be doing rulemaking. There's a graphic of what I just showed you. Nicole, I'm going to be done here in about 1 minute, hopefully. So I realize I've spent a lot of time. But to bring that all together, what influences compact compliance strategy? And it's that probability that I'm just talking about, that it's low on the near term that we'll be doing administration. There are a lot of unknowns what we would get from the Upper Colorado River Commission. There are unknowns about how we would implement that. But right now at the state engineer's office, we are looking at what's going on. We see, you know, we've got our ear to the ground. You don't have to have your ear too close to the ground to know about all the concern about lake levels and the Drought and the concerns of people in all the states. So we are looking at the issues internally to vet them. I would say to lay the groundwork should we need to begin rulemaking in the next few years. But let's just look at our current activities and how these all connect, because remember, I talk about over-appropriation of the Yampa. I talk about measurement rules. I now talk about compact administration. All three of those, in one way or the other, are climate related. They're administration, water administration related, and they're compact related. And my overriding theme, as I think about these issues day to day, is we need to take the appropriate actions with the appropriate timing. I know that on one hand, we could suggest, let's get ahead of the game. Let's do rulemaking now. But there are too many unknowns, too many things that we will learn over time, and too many legal considerations that we get out of the gate too quickly could be problematic for Colorado and Colorado's water interests. That's how I look at that confluence of issues and the way they blend together. Thank you, Nicole, for giving me a couple extra minutes, but I will let you continue then with our program.
Thanks, Kevin. That was, I think, a really nice overview of the challenges that you have as state engineer and trying to adapt to some changing water resource issues and competition between water users. You have a very difficult job. So we're going to transition now into some discussion. And so if I could get Allison and Mike to turn your cameras back on. We've got about 30 minutes, and I have some prepared questions, and Nathan Stewart, I know you've also been sort of monitoring and logging the questions in the chat. So I'm gonna kick us off with one question that's kind of top of mind for me, and then we'll maybe kind of pivot back and forth between some of the prepared questions and some of the audience questions. So the first thing that I would like, and you all have touched on this in different ways in terms of the impacts of drought in the Yampa Basin, but I'd like to try to put just a little bit of a finer point on it. And so could each of you just give me from your perspective what you view as the sort of the science of sort of the state of science as it relates to flow and drought in the basin, and what you see as the impacts of drought and its effect on resource management and our ability to manage water resources and also protect the river at the same time. And so I'll just be quiet, and you guys pipe up if you have some thoughts on that.
Mike, go for it.
Allison, I'll do that. I'll do just a quick brief thing on it. As a rancher, people don't think that science is important to us, and to Dan and I, it's very important. We spend 20 hours a month between the two of us on the science of the ranch. We measure all of our grass. We actually measure it 4 different ways. So it's very important, because if we don't take care of that land, it's going to come back and bite us, and that has everything to do with water. I mean, if we let it dry up in these drought years and so forth, when we have these rain events, it just runs in the river. And if you've got healthy soil, it absorbs, the plant uses it, they perspire, that causes rain clouds. It's just one big circle. And so Dan and I spend an incredible amount of time on the science as ranchers.
Go ahead,
Allison,
Kevin. No, go ahead.
I'll go ahead, because you might want to respond to this, because first I'm going to mention something about you and the water trust. One of the impacts we see of drought, or probably one of the responses, I'll say, maybe more to the point, is some of the work that Allison and her organization are doing. And I want to go back to 2012, I believe, when the Water Trust first exercised a statute that allows for loans and ended up being leases of water. And it's a little unique in the Yampa River Basin, because I always think of the Yampa as being on the cusp of an issue that other basins didn't experience. They have tools available as things are changing. So when we had low stream flows in the Yampa in 2012, the Water Trust was able to initiate this process, and it wasn't an easy process. I remember working with him quite a bit and other partners in the basin. But maybe to be more concise with my answer, using these tools like loans that allow releases with good sideboards, with good administrative sideboards, to manage those flows in the river. And the impact, to your question, Nicole, Erin Light always needs to make sure she's administering that water, getting it to where it needs to be, but doing it under good legal and administrative cover so that the water rights are not injured. That's an important impact, I think, at least to us, and our need to partner with you all to make those things happen. I also appreciate from both Mike and Allison, their efforts to divert the water or protect the water in these intermediate reaches, to ensure that, Mike, you just made some really good points about how diverting too much can really impact that intermediate reach. And that's why the changes to the Maybell ditch. And so, those efforts are so important. And of course, Allison's efforts to manage the flows in those intermediate reach are so important.
Yeah, to build on that too, as far as the pinch points, I think one effect of drought is that instead of seeing kind of isolated pinch points, we're seeing just an overarching effect that results in more pinch points in more places. But while reservoir releases can be really critical and really effective to address like really precipitous declines, they are inherently reactive. And I think that having a holistic approach to look at the river and how drought affects it, not just from a specific data point, but from all of the specific data points, is something that is going to be critical to effectively managing the system as a whole and taking into consideration not just, you know, that one little stretch, but all of those little stretches put together.
Thanks. That's I think really enlightening. Oftentimes, I think people think about Northwest Colorado and the Yampa River as having adequate water for all of our needs and all of our uses, and I think the three of you have really highlighted that that is not the case, and especially in the last several years. Nathan, do you want to type in and share maybe some of the audience questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Nicole, and feel free to use me in rotation as you see fit. I'll bring a first question forward from Elise Osenga to you, Mike. Elise starts by thanking you for your presentation and then asks, what did conversations with different farms, individuals across the ditch group look like? Was there general support for the Headgate project, or were there concerns that had to be overcome first?
Yes, we did get some kickback from some of our members and so forth. You know, people stated, you know, well, that, you know, it's worked for us for 100 years. Why would we change it? And why would we get an environmental group involved and the government involved and everything else? And that was a challenge. You know, through several meetings, we just told them, you know, this is what it is. We've got to do these improvements. And if we don't, somebody's going to make us do those improvements. So let's get ahead of the game and get it done. And we actually hired a company called Ranch Advisory Partners to help us with that transition. And they've done a really good job. So there was a challenge there, but we overcame it quicker than I thought we would. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, and so follow up on that, Kevin and Allison, tell us a little bit about some of the cultural or economic factors that you see influencing water management and sustainable water planning in the basin.
Well, I think that one of the big influence is the culture of cooperation in the Yampa that I think maybe I wouldn't say it's unique, but it is certainly very strong. And I think, as Mike was just discussing, sometimes there's a little resistance, but as far as I've seen, people really seem to recognize a common goal and common purpose, and seem to find a way to work together, even though there may be initial reservations. So I think that whatever that culture is of finding a way and getting through it through a collaborative effort is something culturally that I think is really special about the Yampa Basin. And as far as economics are concerned, that's a really good question. I think that there's a lot of questions as far as the value of water and how we look at that. And I guess from our perspective, I think that water has value, not just from an economic perspective, but from the number of uses that it can support at one time. So, you know, you're not just, you know, supporting fish, you're also boosting flow so that that structure that can only get water when it's at a certain flow can actually pull water. So you're supporting ag as well. So I think that beyond just the pure monetary value, there's multi-purpose benefits that really can be realized. And I think that this project that Mike's discussed is really just such an excellent illustration of that.
Nicole, you mentioned the culture, and I think that's a good term. we see in the Yampa River Basin a culture that maybe doesn't exist to the same extent in other basins, and that is that culture of cooperation that Allison just mentioned. And Aaron Light is very much aware of how in past years of low flow, it was managed not through a call, but through cooperative efforts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're on the cusp of change, and as the demands get greater and the flows diminish. And some of what I talked about moves us more into the realm of rigid administration, for lack of a better term. I don't like the word rigid, but you understand what I mean. And so I wonder whether there's an ability to blend that culture of cooperation into that administration so that we get the best of both worlds. We can protect water rights, but we can also allow for water users to cooperate and, as Alice said, collaborate with solutions. You know, a good example, again, something we would not see in the South Platte necessarily, or the Arkansas, because they realized this situation 120 years ago. But the idea of funded reservoir releases for the purpose of supplementing flows for environmental purposes and for the purposes of keeping the call at bay so that people can keep diverting. That's another aspect of the culture, you know, looking at solutions like that. So I hope that the basin can continue with that culture.
And Kevin, I think it's an interesting point to try to find a way to blend administration, you know, of the priority system, which really doesn't necessarily allow for a whole lot of flexibility with, you know, some amount of cooperation in the basin. Do you have, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Can you think of an example of how that might work, where we're able to sort of use the priority system to administer the basin, but also allow water users quite a bit of flexibility? Like, what would be an example of being successful in that area?
That's a good question, Nicole, and I hadn't really thought about this ahead of time, but I'm going to go back several years to an effort on the Crystal River. Allison, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this or not, but where water users got together and among themselves developed sort of a cooperative, I'm going to call it a no-call agreement, but a cooperative effort that certain water rights that would be able to call would not call to preserve the ability for maybe others with greater need to call, or just to, again, preserve the stream flows. So, you know, it might be within a basin. And I think Aaron has seen this in an informal way, or, you know, not a documented way, but just a cooperative agreement that some people would not divert when they have the ability to, for the good of the river and the water users as a whole. And in so doing, just keep the call off. So I think that's one example, as we saw on the Crystal, and in a formal way, and maybe in an informal way on a couple of tributaries in the Yampa.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Allison, do you see agreements like that as common in Colorado, or is that something that's still relatively rare?
I'd say the Crystal River example is a really special exemplary case that we'd like to see more of. I think there's other mechanisms that, again, I'd also like to see more of that can kind of illustrate how this might work in other places. One is the Cache-Laputa River, where the Water Trust is working with a number of partners, including water users, municipalities, Northern Water Conservancy District, just a whole slew of folks, CWCB, to augment flows in the Cache-Laputa River using municipal supplies. And I think that's another example of folks getting together and kind of putting aside what they might otherwise have as, you know, differences of opinion to do something good for the river using what they have and kind of benefiting the greater good through individual efforts. And
Mike, when you hear these sorts of ideas thrown around, what's your kind of immediate reaction from a water user perspective? Do you see this as something that we're capable of accomplishing in the Yampa Basin, or are the obstacles that you see that might present themselves?
Absolutely. I think it's very capable, and I didn't realize that Crystal River did that. But as Kevin kind of mentioned, several of us districts have kind of talked a little bit, and have in the past, when somebody's short of water, we'll call and say, hey, you guys got a little water. But maybe we need to sit down and have that conversation. And I think it would be very receptive. I really like the idea. I'm pretty pro management, so there might be a few that get their hair raised a little bit on this deal, but I really like that idea, and I think it's something that we need to move forward.
That's a great discussion. Thank you, guys. Nathan, do you want to bring forward another audience question?
I'd be happy to. Great questions here from the audience. Keep these coming. I'll raise one on behalf of Marty Ralph here to all panelists. From your experience, what significant changes, if any, have you seen in terms of changes in weather and water conditions?
I'll start with a quick, easy answer because I could pull up the report from Aaron Light that I've referenced, and it's just a good look at the gradually declining trajectory on flows. I mean, all of us how graphs look, they do this. But if you look at that long-term trajectory, you're seeing the diminished flows, and so that's my scientific data right there. Just based on measurements, and of course, a lot of what I talked about is to address that. But Mike Allison, you might have a better answer than
that. So I'll go next on that question. Yeah, there's no doubt that we've been in a drought, for a couple of years and so forth. My wife and I just had this conversation last night. We don't manage for a drought. We manage for a dry year. We consider a drought those 100 and 500 year events, and we want to be prepared for those. And if our range is prepared for those when those come, we're just going to be better off. And so there's no doubt that we're in a dry season, and we need to make that the norm. But we need to be prepared for worse time coming.
Yeah, and Kevin, you reminded me, and I actually went back. There's a couple of sentences that I pull regularly from Aaron Light's report on over appropriation designation, and I put those sentences as quotes from that report in the chat box. And what Aaron writes in that report is that the annual volume of flow at the Maybell gauge has declined from approximately 1.5 million acre feet to 1.12 over a series of years. And she attributes that to the adjudication of new water rights, the potential for a hotter, drier climate, and I think wells are also mentioned in there as a potential cause. So she doesn't really, attribute any one thing. And so that is, I think, the situation that we are dealing with in the basin is one of declining overall volume, as well as a change in timing. And Allison, how do you see those trends? Are those reflected across the state? And do you see other basins dealing with that in a way that you kind of hope that the Yampa would take on?
Yeah, in terms of the trends and the changes, I think that two things come to mind in the Yampa specifically, just because we look at that very closely. And that is that the runoff drop-off occurs earlier. So it just seems like that point at which things are really high comes and drops off occurs earlier consistently earlier. And then also when things start to get really bad, they don't get bad, they get bad. Like it's very precipitous. So I think those are two trends that we've seen with increasing regularity. As far as in other parts of the state, I think one thing that the Yampa has that a lot of other places don't is the Yampa is largely a natural state. So you can kind of see a lot of those effects that in other places you might not, because it is so tightly regulated. Like there's not a drop in the South Platte that isn't like, you know, goes from one bucket to another bucket and somebody knows exactly whose bucket that drop belongs into. So I think that a lot of those effects aren't nearly as pronounced, those natural effects in other parts of the state, as far as I'm aware.
And Mike, to kind of follow up on some of those hydrologic trends that we're seeing, one of the things that we did, we're in the middle of an integrated water management plan, as you know, through the Basin Roundtable. And one of the things that we did is we went out and we talked to about 150 water users and asked them what their challenges were and their concerns and opportunities. And we asked them about their drought planning and how for their hay meadows and their cattle ranches and their production agriculture, how they do drought planning. And the typical response that we got was, well, our drought planning is that we, don't put as much water on the field so we get less hay, or we sell more of our cattle. And to me, that seems unsustainable over long periods of hydrologic decline. So I'm wondering if you have some ideas on how we maybe could be doing drought planning for agriculture a little bit better in the basin, so that it isn't sort of every operation for themselves.
Yeah, great question. And actually one of my favorite subjects. So if I get into the weeds here a little bit, just holler at me. So we do a very extensive drought management plan. We are unusual. There's a few producers in the area that do this, but not as many that goes as deep as we do. And we'd like people to follow suit for us. But as I said before, we measure everything. We have several transects in our pastures. If you look at most leases, so Dan and I lease approximately 28 to 30,000 acres, but we only own about 300 of it. And so, it's private landowners, it's the state, it's the BLM, and most of those leases are animal unit months, and we figure everything with an animal unit day. We also figure an animal unit per acre per inch of rain, right down to a cow patty. We'll go out, a cow patty will tell you real quick the health of your soil. If it's hard and frisbee, your soil's not healthy. It needs to have dung beetles in it. It needs to have worms in it. And so we measure a lot. And to do that, we can't manage it unless we measure it. And our goal is to have healthy soil, so that these droughts, we can recover very quickly. And this year we decreased our cow herd down to 10%. We went from approximately 250 head down to right now currently we're somewhere around 40 head, 45 head, and we're continuing to destock, and everybody thinks we're crazy, but we know that we're going to come back even stronger and be even better. One of the landowners told me here several years ago, every time they have a drought year, they destock a little bit, and they've never been able to get those numbers back up. And that raised a huge red flag for me, because that shouldn't be. If you take care of that ground and that soil and your grass, we should actually, have a healthy soil. We don't want these major floods, these major runoffs going into the river. We want it to absorb in the ground. And so, good question. One of my favorite subjects. I could talk about it forever.
Well, and I think we have a lot to learn from you as well. And I love that in a conversation about water, we always seem to end up talking about soil health. And I think that connection between soil health and the river and water management is one that probably needs to be made a little bit more. Let's see, Nathan, what about some other audience questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to bring forward a question on behalf of Tim Sullivan, and this is actually linked to the question that you just responded to, Mike, regarding sustainability. So I think this is a good pairing. So to you, Kevin, to what degree looking forward do you believe upper basin users should be looking to reduce total consumptive uses, not presuming where those reductions would come from?
That's a great question. I'm going to say, and I hope this doesn't sound too evasive, even though it does, but in my capacity as the state engineer, I am more than anything responsible for the ability of Colorado water users to get the best beneficial use out of their water rights. It's part of their culture, their economy. It's just the nature of what they do. It's what Mike Camlin does for a living while I sit in a nice little office in Denver. Mike's out there making a living, as are so many others. And so, do I have any suggested direction that people reduce their consumptive use for the benefit of the compact or for other needs? No. I suggest that people, do their operations as they see fit. Now, there may be other areas and other interests. For example, I hate to bring this into the conversation, but to make the point, demand management. If there is someday a program that the upper basin states have approved and can administer, then maybe it's beneficial to Colorado if people under their voluntary and temporary compensated way reduce their consumptive use. I will leave that to the demand management experts. There may be a situation where we're getting close to a compact administration situation, and there is some other basis that people are encouraged to reduce their consumptive use to protect against that. But right now, my answer is that you have a right to water. It's a constitutional right, and you use it to its best beneficial use. That's what my state engineer's hat on, Nicole.
You have a very tricky line to walk there.
Can I touch on that question?
Please do. Yeah.
I really would. Demand management, and you can tell just by listening to Kevin, that's really a hot source right now. I mean, every meeting I go to that comes up. There's groups all over the state that are working on this. And the truth of the matter is, agriculture has the majority of the water rights, and they're going to be the first ones to do the demand management. And I'm not opposed to it. I think eventually someday it's going to happen. But agriculture can't sustain that by themselves. We have to have help from the municipalities and the industry and industrial and so forth. Because if we hammer agriculture, we're gonna lose ground that the migrating birds use. We're gonna lose our return flow. We're gonna lose food. And so we really need to look at this really hard and the consequences, not only environmentally, but economically. And so we have to have this conversation, and have had this conversation a lot. It's a very touchy subject, but it's one that we need to have, and we need to have one now so that when it does happen, everybody understands what's going on. So really a hot subject right now.
Thanks, Mike. Allison, is there any aspect of that you want to touch on? Okay, Nathan, we have, I think, about 10 minutes left in this panel. Do you want to bring up another audience question? Is there anybody from the audience that would like to ask a question?
I'd be happy to, Nicole. We'll watch the side too if folks are wanting to mic in. Please do. to join the conversation. I can share one here on behalf of Anna Wilson, and Allison, it's pointed to you, but I see potential for other panelists to weigh in here too. She asks, would you say we are currently monitoring effectively for both supply, for example, soil, streams, snow, rain, and demand or usage? If not, where are the gaps?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the challenges that we face as far as our work is having a really good, reliable source of flow in the stream, because it is so variable as far as what's being taken out where and what's accruing where. So real-time stream flow measurements, I think, are something that we would really find very beneficial for our work in terms of understanding the trends and also reacting to the conditions as they then exist. So that's one thing that I think we would love to see more of.
Kevin, I'm sure you have some thoughts on water supply and demand data.
Yeah, and I apologize, Nicole. I was prepared to not weigh in on that one, but I probably might ask you to repeat that just to make sure I'm clear.
Yep, the question was about whether we have adequate information and data on both the water supply side and the water demand side to sort of make the decisions that we need to make.
Yeah, and so that's why I was avoiding it. I just wanted to be clear on that. Again, wearing my state engineer hat, we're going to respond to conditions. You want good, reliable water administration from us. The reason I am not clear on my answer, I know that I spoke to a news reporter weeks ago that was concerned about certain new diversions in the West Slope and whether we had done an analysis of whether there was enough water supply or too much demand, both sides of the coin, to allow that. And so I think the studies, basin by basin, year by year, month by month, could give us different information. And I guess my answer to that is, from a planning perspective and a policy sort of way, there may be changes that someone would like to make. But I think as far as administering and planning for that administration, that data would not be really informative to Aaron or me in terms of what people do.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the unique, well, it's probably not that unique, but one of the, I guess, challenges that we talk a lot about in the Yampa Basin is sort of the lack of measurement and also lack of reporting of use into the, water users are supposed to report their use annually to the Division of Water Resources, and that information feeds into a lot of basin-wide planning related to hydrology models, and we have done some analysis of our existing hydrology models to see how well they actually, how accurate they are as compared to on-the-ground conditions, and we do find departures between modeled conditions and actual conditions. And I think the theory is that a lot of that has to do with sort of a lack of long-term water use records. Mike, is that something that you see down in the lower? I know we definitely see some of that in the middle and upper part of the basin. Is that something that you think that the lower basin struggles with, is sort of adequate reporting to the state?
That's a loaded question. Yes, I do that. I know that I know some people that do not report like they should, and their theory is on it, well, the state doesn't need to know what we're doing, and that's totally the wrong theory. And I'm a very big advocate of a measuring devices. And I think one of the holdups, and Kevin, I'm not throwing you into the bus at all here, or Aaron or whatever. I'm trying to help you guys a little bit here. I've had several landowners say, well, we turn our reports in every year and they don't get recorded in the, we can't find them in the state website and so forth. And I've talked to Aaron about this before, and it's a labor issue for them. We throw a lot of money at a lot of this stuff, but maybe DWR needs a little help. There's a bottleneck for their labor to get some of this stuff into the computer and make it better. And from what I understand, that bottleneck is it takes the state of Colorado so long to hire somebody to help Kevin and Aaron. And there's such a labor shortage that a lot of that stuff that should be recorded is not getting recorded. And so not only are we having problems with people not turning those numbers in, but the state is having trouble keeping up, in my opinion. And I think that's something we need to help them with.
Fair comments, Mike. No, I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Yeah, more staff for the Division of Water Resources. That'd be one of our take homes today.
Let's throw some money at it and help them out a little bit.
Yeah. Nathan, it looks like maybe we have time for one more question, maybe two. Do you have any that are rising to the top for you?
Yeah, I do, Nicole. I can bring this in for the panel, and several in the audience have asked questions in this wheelhouse. So I'll use Julie Vano's wording here, but would also credit Olivia Miller for a question related, and also Madison Muxworthy. So Julie asked, again, all panelists, what information about future changes in climate would help you in your work?
I'll just jump in and maybe reiterate a point, give our other panelists a minute to think, but reiterate my point about this big compact administration question and what's out there for us in terms of compact administration falling below our non-depletion obligation. If I have more certainty about that, either way, that it is imminent, or that it is way off in the future, that allows me the time on behalf of our agency to do more contemplative planning as far as what administration might look like. But as I said, I hope I didn't misstep on my response on data a few minutes ago. Data is important for that long-term understanding of how the basin is using water for different policy directions or compact administration directions. And so I think in much the same way that climate data would be more informative to us. But in our immediate water administration duties, I hate to say it quite this way, but we react by applying prior administration, regardless of what the climate is doing.
Thanks, Kevin. Allison or Mike, do you guys have any thoughts on long-term climate data and water supply data and how it could be more helpful?
Well, I'm really excited about what I'm hearing about the SNOTEL work as far as estimating our snowpack and getting that really more keyed into what we can expect. I think because so much of our water does originate from snowpack. I mean, it is our reservoir. That's our upstream reservoir. Having a really good sense of what that is and to plan for the future, I think is something that'll be really helpful for us to kind of figure out how to game out each summer as things get tricky, kind of what you're playing with.
Mike, any thoughts to add to
that? I'm sorry, my little kid, my attention span was not long enough, and I don't remember the question.
That's okay. That's all right. I think we are actually coming right up on time. Is that Nathan? How are we doing? Do we have time for one more question, or should we call it?
I could sneak one in from Mike that's just related to that question we just asked. Mike, if I can pose this one to you from Madison Muxworthy. She asks, you mentioned measuring variables on your land for predicting drought and its impacts. Do you measure soil moisture? And if so, does that inform your decision-making on your ranch?
You know, absolutely we do. And not only in our fields where we grow crops, but you know, out in the range, we do. And we measure that several different ways, whether it's a soil sample or you can look at a plant and we call it plant vigor. That'll tell us a lot. If you've got plant vigor, you know that you got a good healthy root system and there's moisture there and the roots are deep, getting to the moisture, and that's a huge sign for us. Yep.
There's a lot of science and management that goes into growing hay and producing beef for the rest of us. So good to know about those. Okay, I think that we're right at about time. So I would just like to thank Mike and Allison and Kevin for giving us your morning, and everybody else that has joined us today. I hope that this was valuable and that you learned a few things and maybe had a couple aha moments. And so with that, I think I'll turn it back over to the Rendezvous staff.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I just want to reiterate a big, huge thank you to you, Mike, Allison, and Kevin for your time and the great discussion this morning, and to everyone for their participation. We'll hope to see everyone back here at 11 for our last panel for the Rendezvous, Strategies for Adaptation and Action. Thanks all.
Thank you.